Hi, I'm Kathy and thank you for joining me today for some very eclectic stamping. We're going to be using two of my favourite stamps. And Matthew's going to do a quick shot to them for us, the Emu and the Dream Catcher, and we're going to be using them together. So this card came about at an expo recently, a stamp show, and someone was admiring the Emu and then they looked up and saw a picture of a sample of the Dreamcatcher done with a shimmer dust background. And they said, oh, but we really like that too. So I said, well, why not put them both together? So I thought, how cool would it look if the Emu looked like he had just smashed his head through the Dreamcatcher? So then I set about trying to make that. Now the other products of course that we're using, we'll be using some Versamark ink for embossing, and also the Colour Blast shimmer dusts. Now these are a pigment powder, pure pigment, with just a little bit of mica in them. So to make this look work, I've had to make a couple of different masks, one of the Dreamcatcher, and I've already stamped and embossed the Emu just to save time a little bit. So what I did is I popped the mask on where the circle of the Dreamcatcher is going to go. Then I popped a mask on of the feathers, and then stamped the Emu and through that, and then embossed him. The other mask that I've got already made is one of the Emu's face. So we've stamped and embossed with the black. So now I thought, the sample that I made of this yesterday, I actually embossed it in copper, which looks great, but I thought let's try today doing it in white to get a greater contrast. And so yeah, we'll give that a go and see how well that stands out from the shimmer dusts. So Versamark ink, we've got our Dreamcatcher already loaded up on our block. So now we need to cover the Emu's face, and it's a bit hard to see through the sticky note, but you can see where all the lines of his hair join up to know that you've got it in about the right spot. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate. I've got a bit of catching paper ready for my white embossing powder. Okay, so it's a little bit tricky placing these. Make sure you've got it nice and inky. So we need to position it so that it does definitely go through that gap that we've left for it. But we also want it fairly even either side of the card. Of course, what could we do if we didn't get it even either side of the card? We'd just trim a bit of card off and make it look like it was even. Yeah, there's always, nearly always, ways around little mistakes in stamping. Not mistakes, creative expressions. Okay, let's lift that up and get our white powder on. And where's my little brush? Give it a good tap. Tap on the back. And I can see we've got it just where we want it, maybe a little bit high, but some of that will cover once we put on the feathers hanging down. I'm just going to stop and heat this one before I go any further. So I'm moving my embossing powder well out of the zone. And we'll grab the heat gun. Sorry, this is going to be noisy for a moment. And we're going to heat this one from the back, which actually, it works better for white powder. Not quite sure why. Very open if someone has an explanation as to why white embossing powder is better heated from the back. So we just need to watch it to see when it's going to start changing. Now I don't want to, actually I've just noticed we've actually got a little bit of grains of embossing powder has stuck to the Emu's face. So if that hasn't melted yet, I'm just going to brush that off because I really don't want white in amongst his eyes. I like his eyes to be really black. So let's just smoosh those bits off without mucking up the rest of the white embossing. If you decided that some of these bits of the Dreamcatcher were coming in a bit close to your design, you could actually just whisk off that little bit of embossing powder and push them back. But having a few come in is actually quite good because it makes it look like there's still tendrils of the Dreamcatcher frame around him still being broken. So let's go back to our heating. Now I'm trying to focus the heat just where the dream catcher is because I don't want to overheat the black embossing powder. Because I'm working on 300 GSM cotton blend, I may have to come around and do a little bit of heating from the front. But I'm also very aware that with the 300 GSM, it's actually very easy to overheat it. So I'm talking really close to the heat gun, which probably isn't making it easier. I find on the 300 GSM cotton blend, it's very easy to overheat the embossing powder. And I think that's because the card is thicker, so it holds on to the heat for a bit longer. I'm just going to place it down and just do a quick run. And then stop. I can always go back over if I need to do a little bit more. There's a few areas look a little bit dull, so we may come back to those. But let's do our next bit of the design. So I'm going to get the feathers and ink those up. And try and stamp it so that they meet with the rope part of the dream catcher, but they also fit nicely in those gaps that we've left for them. So I'm just checking that's the double feather at that point. Okay. Press down. Again, double check that I haven't flicked any white onto his eyes, and we can now pop that powder away. Right, let's give this one a heat. Let's see how we've gone. Just going to turn that around a bit so I don't actually heat my hand too much. Although it's quite a cold morning this morning, a little bit of heat gun on the hand is not a bad thing. That's looking like it's going really well. So I'm just going to check that I've got it all. Look a bit around there. Okay. Looking good. As soon as that's cooled, we'll start putting our shimmer dust on. Now the colours in the shimmer dust that I'm going to work with. So our shimmer dusts come in these little pots, but I like to work with them in a pot where I have put a pin in the top so that I can shake out just a little bit at a time. So I'm going to use Midnight, which is actually a bit of a combination of colours. Most of the shimmer dusts have a little bit of combination, but not too much. But the Midnight is made up with quite a few different colours, so that will be quite exciting. And then we're going to add a little bit of Peacock in there as well, just to give it a little bit of a lift. Now I don't want to get too much of these colours on his face, so we'll pop that mask back over his face again. And I also don't want to get too much colour over the feathers because I want to be able to paint those in later. So let's mask those while we're shaking on our colour. We will still get some spillage onto them, but this will just stop some of it. Okay, so let's shake on our Midnight. Now, it would be really good if you would just stay stuck down there. That would be really nice. So we're going to tip some around the top, a bit down the side, and some in between there, right down to the end. Always looks like you're using so little colour, but it just comes out so dynamic. So we have a bit of our Peacock, but not a lot. Okay, so then you very carefully lift your masks out of the way. And of course, when we start spritzing with the water, we are going to get a little bit flicking around. I might just take my scratch pad out of there and just work on a waterproof surface. So with my water, I'm going to spray away from his face. And you'll see those colours just start to take off. You can get a straw and give them a little bit of a blow. water down on there. If you hold the spritzer bottle up a little bit higher, you'll get more of a mist. You can see even though I only did a little sprinkle with the Peacock, we still got quite a lot of colour on there. Now let's spray around his head. I've just got a bit of blue on his nose, and I was going to try and avoid getting too much colour on his face, so we'll just dab that out before we go any further. Let's do another little spritz. And what I forgot to do was to actually give the card a spritz before we started, which would have stopped it curling up quite so much. Let's give ourselves a little blow again. Turn the card around. A little bit more happening in the background. That's looking pretty good. So now I'm going to get a bit of paper towel and just soften that off a bit and speed up the drying a bit. So it does take some colour out, but that's what we want, because we want, where we're going to paint bits, we want that to stand out more. So by taking off a little bit of background colour, that means where we deliberately add colour, it'll show out a bit more. So I'm going to bring my scratch pad back in again. Now I've already loaded up a Tim Holtz palette with some of my shimmer dusts. I'm handling it carefully because I've got the lid open. I don't want to tip them everywhere. So to do this, you pop just a little bit of colour in and then add a bit of water. Now I've got a spot here where I'm going to add a little bit, mix a bit of brown for his body. So I've already popped a little bit of amber in there, and now I'm going to add some cobalt. In our conversations on Facebook yesterday, we talked about maybe adding Duke, and I experimented with adding some Peacock, but I felt those had a little bit too much green in them. So now I'm going with cobalt, which is more of a blue. And you really only need, to mix your paint, you only need a very small amount. And you don't want to, at this stage, you don't want to actually use the hole in the top and shake it out, because we really want to not, this stuff goes everywhere. So you don't want to get colour popping from that spot into this one. This tray, you can see, is nearly in need of a wash. It's got a few bits have wandered out. I do a lot of travelling, and so it gets, I do always try to carry it flat, but it does get shaken around a bit. I'm just going to drop in 2 drops of water. And then we can actually use the same water brush just to mix those together and see if we've got, well, that's actually a lot darker than what I wanted. Let's brush it out on a bit of paper and see what colour we've got. And I think it's going to have made way too much dark in there. Okay. So let's change that a bit. We're going to go back to our amber, and we'll add some sunflower in as well, some yellow. So I'm just going to carefully take lids off. And I'll just come in and give the next little tray a bit of a wipe in case there's anything contaminating in there. Okay, so let's go. And also make sure that you wipe your spatula off between colours as well. Definitely don't want to be contaminating colours. So we're going to pop in some yellow. I know it doesn't look like yellow, but it is. And that's the lush green doesn't look like a green either, but it's a great green. And then we'll get some amber, which is our orange. Clean your spatula. This is not getting on with doing painting and things, is it? But I guess it's good showing how to mix the colours. Now I'm just going to lift up some of that blue out of there rather than shaking in some blue. We are starting to get more of a browny tone there. That's good. Way more brown. Okay, that's what we wanted. Right, so now we can start actually painting our picture. So that's given it a little bit of chance to dry off a bit too. So I'm going to start with a little bit of amber, and nearly dropped my water brush. Nearly dropped it on the floor. Okay, starting off with some amber and some sunflower on his beak. Now it's going to be, remember we had a little bit of peacock got on there, so it's going to pick up a little bit of green where it's mixing with that bit of peacock, but that's all right, we'll just move it around a bit. Now let's come in with some amber. Just blend some orange tones in there as well. It's wonderful when you look at this close up and have a look at the amount of colour that's come through from the midnight. There's bits of orange in there, bits of pink. Now I often do his eyes in the amber tones. Yesterday I did the peacock, which I quite liked. I wonder what should we do today? No, give him green eyes? Do emus ever have green eyes?
What has logic got to do with it?
What has logic got to do with an emu that looks like this? That is right. Okay, so let's pick up, what have we got here? A bit of Paris. Make sure my brush is clean. Cool. That's going to be a bit different. Okay, now let's try our new brown tones on our actual emu body. So because I've got the two brushes, I'll use the finer brush to pick up the colour. Because then I've got my other brush on hand to actually just smush some cleaner water into there and let it bleed out a bit, because I want this to look fairly fluffy. I don't want a solid edge to where his head finishes. To give it more of a look of feathers, we want it to look, I said fluffy, didn't I? But that's the word I'm thinking of. We want it to create a fluffy, uneven look to it. Now if I've got too much colour there, I can always get my paper towel and just dab it back a little bit. That way it's not going to keep getting carried away and keep flowing to where we don't want it. So let's just still smush a bit of water into those edges there and make that a bit softer. That's better. Now we're starting to see a softness to those edges. You know, I'm looking at that colour going now, oh, is it a bit too orange? Is it close to his beak? Let's grab a little bit more of the blue and mix it in with it, and hope we don't totally lose the mix. You know, I'm going to have to start experimenting with all the colours to see what gives me the best brown now, aren't I? Bit in there. Let's just use our other brushes to blend it in. Clean the brush off. Now I just leaked a little bit into his eye, so I'm just going to use my brush, just cleaning it off and just try and smooth that out a bit. Clean your brush and just touch over the edge of it. So you see, as we're also getting the colour on for the emu, our dream catcher is starting to, the white bits of it are starting to show out more. So as we go down to do his body, I'm just going to spin the card around for a moment so I can get the tip of the brush up nice and close to him. And we'll do a little bit down there, stopping of course where I get to the ropey part of the Dreamcatcher. I'll spin it back around now so you can see it better, and just come in and soften all those edges. And again, if your colour's getting carried away, so your emu is becoming too wide, just come in with your paper towel and soften it off. Take a bit of colour out. But that's great, we can start to see that's really showing out the white a lot more. Now we've got some emu body in between our feathers. So we need to put a little bit of emu body in there, and he's sort of going across this way. So I'll pop some brown in there, and then just sort of smoosh it out. I think we need a little bit just on this side as well. Let's come in and do some smooshing. We're just going to let that blend out into more of the background colour. But be careful where there's more of the background colour, because I don't want to make total mud of it. I don't want the brown to blend out into those colours and make that look like mud. Now I think his body would come out a little bit on this side as well. So we'll just add a bit in there. He's very much a long-necked emu today. Now we need some colour on the actual rope part, because we need to pick that out and make it look more obvious. And I think I'll pick up navy, which is what we used yesterday as well. Where's navy? There we go. Just because it's a deeper blue, so it's not going to compete with the other colours. And I'm not stopping to do any fancy blending here, we're just popping that bit of colour in. And it will certainly make the white of the embossing stand out more. So we start to see it's disappearing here, and you're not really seeing where the rope is. So by just giving it that bit of colour inside, that'll make that stand out a whole lot more. Now our feathers. What colours do we want on our feathers? So purple was requested yesterday, but that was with the copper embossing. So let's go with purple and some of the peacock. So for purple, we'll use some passion. But we're going to still put a little bit of our beautiful peacock in there as well, which is going to make for a very rich, dual-toned feathers. That's an interesting word, isn't it? Dual-toned, because it could be dual, as in D-U-E-L, because I've got two colours. Or it could be dual, J-E-W-E-L-L, because they're like gemstone-y colours.
Or are the two colours dueling with each other?
Well, yes, they are, aren't they? Are they competing or are they complementing? You could always paint with the midnight too, because again you'd get lots of colours coming through. That's a beautiful mix though, the passion purple with the peacock. That comes up really nice. Also, if we'd wanted to go with greeny tones, the lush in with the peacock would work beautiful too. You'd get real emerald looking colours. Add a dash peacock down the centre there. This is very pretty. Actually, I might leave that a little bit soft. I'm not going to add any more Peacock because there's a really light bit of it there already. So I'm just cleaning my brush so I can just soften out the purple a bit. And hopefully not mess with that lovely soft blue that we've got happening there. Okay. Now, if we thought that some of these areas there's not enough of the midnight, like this side's quite light, we could bring in a little bit of midnight in here, just to make our feathers and our rope area stand out more. So just going to put a bit on directly, but then put a fair bit of water in there to get it blending out. And then we'll paper towel off a little bit. No, I was having a really good drip was happening there and I spoilt it, didn't I? Let's add a bit more in. Clean the brush, smush in some water, because we don't want it to look too different to the rest of the background. But just that little bit of dark is going to bring out that side of the pattern more. And what about a bit in there? A little bit off my brush. I like that better. We've just now picked out that design a bit more there. Okay, so to finish off this one, I'm not going to add any shading around the edge of the card. Don't think it needs any of that. So I'll just close our palette and move that to one side. Now, to finish off, I'm just going to come in with some liquid, some Stickles, and I've got them warming up in my pocket. And I've actually grabbed either Seaglass or Twinkle because I was going to just wait and see what I thought would go best with the card. And I think the Seaglass is going to. We've got quite a bit of turquoisey colour happening there. So a little squeeze out on the scrap just to make sure that it's flowing well. And we haven't got any air bubbles. And we're going to add this into all the little gem droppers on the dream catcher. Around here as well. And we can even make a few up if we want to. Okay, I'll also go in and add some Glossy Accents to his beak and where do I put my Glossy Accents? There it is. His beak and his eyes, because that really makes those stand out. Again, a little squeeze on the scrap just to make sure there's no air bubbles. And when I put this on the eyes, I don't just do the coloured bit, I do it over the actual iris of his eye as well. Otherwise it looks odd that it's just a shiny ring. You want the whole of the eye to stand out. And on this beak, so I'm just using the nozzle just to get to the edges. And try not to lift off the card too much. Try and sort of keep it flowing fairly evenly. I'm not squeezing it much at all. If you keep it fairly even, you're less likely to get air bubbles in there. So that looks a bit cloudy at the moment, but it will dry beautiful and clear. So I'm going to bring this forward onto the black so you can see how it's looking. So you can see that lovely shine. Have we got, yep. And I'll also bring in the one that we did yesterday with the copper so you can compare and see which one you like best with the embossing. The white definitely lifts it a bit more. Every time you do it, it's going to look different because the shimmer dusts always act differently and you get different amounts on. So it's always going to be a little bit different. I think both of those work really well, but possibly our emu does stand out a bit more with the white, and the feathers do stand out a bit more being done with the white. And also in those ones, I mask the feathers before putting the shimmer dust on, whereas here we've got a little bit of colours competing together. But anyway, so that's our card with our emu smashing through that dream catcher. I think it's lots of fun, and it just shows some of the ways that you can mix up some of your stamps and use them together. So I'm hoping you're going to have fun having a play with this one and have a go with those gorgeous shimmer dusts. And we'll see you next time for some more Crafting with Kathy.